Welcome to Southwest Florida Real Estate Update, hosted by area realtor Jim York and York Real Estate Group of Downing Fry Realty. Our show will bring you the most up-to-date information about the local real estate market, featuring leading experts in the real estate field.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Southwest Florida Real Estate Update. I'm Michael York with the York Real Estate Group, and I'm joined today by our host Jim York and his guest Don Ross of Ross Title and Escrow.
Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Well, we're here with Don Ross, which is our monthly show, right?
Hi, how are you?
So for the viewers that haven't met you or have known about you, could you just please tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'm an attorney. I'm with Ross, Lanier & Dyfick. I own Ross Title and Escrow, a title company. I'm a shareholder in Downing Fry Realty, been in-house counsel for 20-odd years. Been here in Collier County myself since '85. Our office is on the corner of 6th Avenue North and 41 in Naples. And I have a degree in taxes, which will come in handy for today's show.
It certainly will. Tell us a little bit about your team down there.
We have 8 people, might be 9. It keeps changing. Most of them have been with me, let's see, one's been with me 28 years. Her daughter's been with me 18, 19 years. Her sister's been with me 10 years. So I've got like a family group. My wife retired from teaching, so she's one of my compliance people. You need compliance people these days, unfortunately.
Right.
We pre-closes, post-closes. Very good unit. We handle a fairly high volume of closings. Very experienced. Very pleased with them. Good team.
That's exactly what we need today in this market because of the rules, the laws that are changing by our government. And then today we're going to talk about foreign buyers in the first part of our show. In the second part, we're going to talk about foreign sellers. And before we start in that, I just want to tell them that your company and your team down there is very experienced working with foreign buyers and sellers. So that's something that we should add to our show a little bit about. So, but let's start with the buyers, starting with the contract. What is the difference between a foreign buyer buying a piece of property here and a U.S. citizen?
The big difference, well, there's multiple differences, and to preface that, I think my first client was from Belgium, honestly, when I was around 25 years old and working with all masters in tax attorneys, LLMs. He was the second wealthiest man in Belgium, and he owned a bunch of casinos, and his concern, what you got to recognize is that people from other countries have different concerns than you and I. They might have currency restrictions in their country, exporting of money restrictions. They might have prohibitive tax rates. Back then, you had 90% tax rates in some country. Spain at that point would limit how much money a Spanish citizen could export out of the country. So when I was in tax school, which was 1982, we would study things like the modern, the motivation of people from different countries, the concerns of people from different countries. They're at that time less concerned about the rate of return on a particular piece of real estate than their primary concern, which was how do we keep this secret from our home government.
Right.
So the term was black money. That was I first learned when I was in my 20s, and how do we protect it in layers of corporate ownership, and then coordinating that with the Internal Revenue Code. So secrecy was a big thing. Knowing their costs up front, I learned at a young age that they wanted to know that. They didn't necessarily care if it was expensive or not. They just want to know, what is it?
Right.
And they'd say, okay, now I know. You had to be very aware of that. There might be cultural things that would make it harder to communicate. So, I was always big on meeting them face to face. So I wanted to look them in the eye and make sure they understand what I'm saying, or I understand that they're not getting it, or they're upset over something. So you had to be aware of, what's going on in their home country, the cultural differences, and then from a U.S. perspective, state taxes and income taxes, and would vary for non-residents versus U.S. citizens or U.S. residents.
Mm-hmm.
And that's evolved over the years. The world's becoming more homogenized to a certain extent, like Canada and the U.S. Is very close.
That's right.
But the U.S. and Uzbekistan or someplace is light years apart, both culturally and what their concerns are, and their desires for secrecy, and then, of course, the tax planning. But from what you and I do on a daily basis, really deals more with how somebody's going to take title.
That's right.
That's the biggie. That's what the realtors, the experienced realtors, hopefully they're experienced. You need the experience just so that you realize that people do have different concerns.
Mm-hmm.
We're not all the same.
Right.
I mean, at some level we are, but they're a product of their environment, their country, and how they take title depends on, is the biggie for buyers.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm talking to agents, which I do quite often, I tell the agents, well, one, you want to project, hopefully it's true, that you've had a lot of experience dealing with people from different parts of the world. You're comfortable doing that.
Right.
And secondly, make sure that the contract is assignable from the buyer's perspective. I mean, if you're out showing property from somebody from the UK
Mm-hmm.
on a Saturday, and they really like a particular home, they need to feel comfortable that it's okay to sign that contract in their name, and they need to be protected that they have the right to transfer it into whatever entity their tax advisors might require. So you need to know your contract, like NABOR.
Right.
It is assignable.
Uh-huh.
Okay, it's right in there. And then the FAR as is, there's a block, I think it's paragraph 6, no, it's 7, where you check off whether or not it's assignable or not. There's 3 options. One, you can assign it and they're released from liability, which you never want to do. The second one, you can assign it but not be released from liability, which is the one most people go with,
Mm-hmm.
or you can't assign it whatsoever.
Whatever.
I mean, the second one, the seller usually doesn't care, how you're going to take title as long as you're not off the hook.
Does the seller have to sign that paper, like addendum afterwards or anything, or is the contract sufficient enough if they do change title?
Well, with the NABOR contract, which I know we talked about it a lot, it's used primarily here in Naples, Collier County. The seller does not have to sign. And I
Okay.
actually had this conversation with an agent yesterday who his buyer used another company, and the son, for whatever reason, needed to assign the contract to his mother, and how do you do that? And I told him, well, there's a provision in the contract, and everybody does it differently.
Right.
I do it a certain way, and really the reason I do it a certain way is I want to make sure that's what the client really wants.
Right.
I get something in writing saying this is what the client wants. I speak to the client to make sure nobody's impersonating the client. I speak to his mom, if that's the case, and make sure she's his mom and nothing odd is going on. And this is where the experience kicks in. You can almost smell it
Right.
when something's awry. What's the reason, how you want to do it. NABOR actually has a form for assigning the contract.
Right.
So there's an addendum where it specifically says that the buyer is assigning it to his mom in this case, but he's not being relieved of any liability under the contract.
Mm-hmm.
And of course the agent asked me, well, what do you mean not being relieved of any liability under the contract? Well, if there's a financing contingency, the son still has an obligation to make a good faith effort to
Right.
obtain the loan. If it's a FAR contract, he still has an obligation to make that second deposit.
Right.
Things like that. There's forms for that. How they're going to take title, But from the realtor's perspective, again, you gotta, this can't be your first rodeo. I mean, you gotta feel comfortable. You don't have to know, like I brought with me one volume of the 2-volume set of the Internal Revenue Code and one of the 6 volumes of the regulations that interprets this mess.
Right.
Just to give you, the viewers, a vague idea of how complex it can get. But from a realtor perspective, from people selling and or buying in this case, you just want to make sure the thing's assignable. Then you need to call people.
Right.
your foreign attorney, your U.S. attorney, so that you can evaluate the various ways you can hold title.
Yeah, we've done a lot of contracts from foreign buyers throughout the world, and it's, it is the culture thing, and they do want to know what the cost is. And the thing, I don't know how much you know about this, but on financing, we can get financing here in the United States for foreign buyers. It's usually 30% down, and, and they're going to have financials, or they might not have tax returns there, but their financials and 3 references, one from an accountant to get the mortgage, and obviously pay stubs or stuff like that. But they also, if they're getting financing here, they have to have a U.S. agent. That's another important thing. So that's something they might want to think about. They could have an attorney be their U.S. agent, or they could, in my case, I've been U.S. agent for several clients here that they trust me. So that's something they maybe want to look at too prior to doing a contract.
I normally work with an attorney in whatever home country they have, because I mean, not only do they have a different tax system in, say, Canada than they do in the U.S., but you have to know, somebody up there needs to know the tax ramifications of the various corporations the buyer might have in Canada, and do they want to take title on one of those, and it's usually not with the taxes they have now. But almost always I work with somebody, whether it's Germany, the UK, Canada, and I say, well, this is the way it is in the U.S., and they say, well, and they have personal knowledge of the buyer's financial situation and whether they're, they have tax losses they can avail themselves of, or they want to do they have a thing called a cross-border trust, where they put their children as the beneficiaries of the trust and the lawyer is the trustee. But large estates, and then you get into, and this is part of my face-to-face conversation. How old are they? How healthy are they? What is the size of the purchase? And I'll use myself as an example. If I get somebody my age in the office, and let's say it's a $300,000 purchase, I say, well, it costs a certain amount of money to pay lawyers to create these various entities to avoid a potential 40% estate tax potential. That's worst case analysis. Would you be better off? Are you, if you're 50 years old to 60 years old and your health is good and you have life insurance, a lot of them will just take title individually and just use life insurance as a way to take care of the costs. It's cheaper than paying lawyers to prepare a cross-border trust. And depending upon how much money they got, they might not want to put it in a cross-border trust, which essentially gives it to their children. They might hope they might need that someday for assisted living or some other essential need. So it's very helpful when they're in front of you. It's hard for me to ask a lady how old she is, so I always I'll use me and say, well, my age is 60, and I'm relatively healthy. God, knock on glass in this case. But if I were buying in Canada and I was paying this amount of money, I think I'd just go buy a insurance policy for X dollars and save myself a bunch of legal fees and go with it.
Well, Don, we're going to end this segment and take a little short break, and then we're going to come back and talk a little bit about sellers that are selling property here in the U.S.
Okay, great.
We'll be back in a minute. Thank you.
Thinking of buying or selling a home in Naples, Marco, Bonita, or Estero, Florida? Think of the most experienced York Real Estate Group associated with the #1 brokerage in Naples, Downing Fry Realty, which produced $1.9 billion in sales in 2014, controlling 43% of all transactions in Naples. Jim, Michael, and Morgan York make up the York Real Estate Group of Downing Fry Realty. With over $250 million in sales transactions, they can offer you the expertise and trust you want and need in a realtor. Call them today at 239-273-6727 or visit their website, www.naplesyorkrealestate.com.
Welcome back. Don, let's continue this conversation. And
Sure.
Let's turn it over to a foreign person selling their property here in the United States and what ramifications there are to that.
The biggest ramification is the withholding tax, the Foreign Investor Real Property Tax Act. Every agent should know that it's there. Every agent should know the point of it, what it was meant to do, and be able to manage the expectations, the anxieties of their seller. That there tends to be a feeling that they're being picked on because they're from another country. So the way I explain it to agents and foreign sellers is this is a method that was first enacted in 1981 to collect money at closing to ensure that the seller will file a tax return and will pay tax on whatever gain they might happen to be.
Right.
Back in 1981, it was 10% of the gross sales price.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you get full credit for that against any tax you owe when you file your tax return. So it's just to make sure that you file a return and you pay whatever it is.
The difference between what they purchased it and what they sold it for.
Roughly.
Right.
Yeah, the tax basis, it can be adjusted for improvements you made to the
That's right.
property and things
Exactly,
like, if you
right.
depreciated it
Yeah.
and things like that. But to make sure they pay tax just like you and I.
Right.
Because again, I always use myself as an example so that people don't get offended. If I were, again, up in Canada and I sold something and they gave me a check, I'm going to run to Florida, throw it in the bank, and not call Canada ever again. I'm not asking if I owe you any more money or, do I have any obligations to that country to file returns and pay some extra fee. I'd rather play dumb and not do it. If I'm a bad person, I guess I think most people just, I like to keep Pandora's box closed if at all possible.
Right.
So this forces the conversation. When they see the withholding, which is now up to 15%, it went up to 15% in February of this year, mainly because the median prices of homes have gone quite a bit up in 36, 37 years.
Is that for different levels or is that a flat 15?
It's a flat 15 on everything, and then there's two different exemptions, one for 300,000 or less.
Okay.
You could tell, the purple piece of paper here.
It's page 331, right?
Oh, this is almost 6,000 pages
know,
in
I'm
the
just
code
teasing.
alone. It's enough to drive you out of your mind. But, you start with the code, then I go to the regs and find all the exemptions and
Right.
how in God's name do they define residence and what's the test and do they count the days the house is empty, which they don't. But anyways, it's gone up to 15% on everything, but if it's under 300,000 and the buyer intends to use it as his or her resident for the next 2 years, there's no withholding.
Okay.
Okay, 300,000 and less. They still have to file a return.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, clients ask me, that doesn't make any sense, Don. Why is there an exemption for 300,000 and less? Well, the National Association of Realtors has a strong lobby. And it was very powerful in 1981,
Right.
and that affected most of their business, so they got Congress to
that.
carve that part out of the enforcement of the law. Now, with the change in February, and the acronym is PATH, Protecting Americans Against Tax Hikes.
Wow.
Ha ha ha.
Uh-huh.
It kills me, but in my dreams maybe. But they bumped it up to 15%, and for 300,000 under, if you're going to be using it as your residence, at least half the time the property's occupied. So if it's only being used 2 months a year, you or your family need to have plans to use it at least a month of the next 2 years.
Okay.
Now you're okay, I tell my buyers, if things change down the road. Some unforeseen circumstances, what they have in the regs. If there are unforeseen circumstances, like the market crashes, or you lose your job, or there are health care issues in your family, and you've got to rent it,
Right.
To help support your family, well, you're fine. And in fact, I've never had a client targeted over that change of circumstances, ever, over 30 years. Now, from 300,000 to $1 million, the code that I have here does reflect that if you intend to use it as a residence, it's knocked from 15% down to 10.
Okay.
Now, the problem practitioners run into is you never know with the IRS whether their definition of residence for 300,000 or $1 million is the same as it is for 0 to 300. So most buyers' attorneys are telling their clients, if it's between 300,000 and $1 million, don't sign the affidavit on what your intent is, because who knows what the IRS is going to come up with when the regs are finished. There is another out for foreign sellers in this case, is they can apply for an early determination from the Secretary of Treasury, the IRS, determining what their actual tax is. And under the code, your IRS has 90 days to respond to this request. So if you have somebody selling their property for $750,000, and that's what they paid for it, and they're making no money, and you have to withhold over $100,000 in withholding, they can apply for a withholding certificate, it's called, showing here's the closing statement when we bought it, here's the contract with us selling it, it's the same.
Right.
The money is held by the buyer's attorney or title company until the IRS responds, and they can get their money back. You get a lot of, I get a lot of blowback from foreign sellers. My last transaction, I got accused of being anti-Irish, and I think I might probably mention that.
Right.
And the irony is I am Irish, so it's pretty tough, but they take, people tend, if they don't understand it, you as a realtor, you got to understand it enough to explain it to them so they're not offended.
That's right.
So we're just trying to, the government in their infinite wisdom wants you to be educated about this. This causes the dialogue to start. They see this big number on the closing statement that's being held back, and how do I get it back? And that way you end up filing your return and paying what Jim York would pay or Don Ross would pay.
Right.
That's the goal.
Simple way.
That's the goal.
Right.
We're not trying to be mean. We're not trying to be nasty. We're educating you. And if you're making a huge profit, then
that's right.
And
if they're back at their other country,
how are we going to get them?
How are we going to get them? That's the whole point.
Yeah, it's impossible. So it's really the basis for this.
Yeah, that's what I kind of explained to them, that we're going to pay the same thing. It's just they can come collect it from us here, but they can't go to.
They know where you and I live,
right.
So the foreign seller, it's problematic, and
if they've made money on it, they should be happy to pay
and if
taxes.
you had a foreign corporate client, who was the seller, a Liechtenstein Anstalt, with bearer shares. I mean, there's no way they'd know who owns that thing. A tax treaty country, Monaco. I mean, forget it. I mean, there's no way you're going to collect it. So that's really, when I talk to realtors, say that's the point. We're not trying to be mean. We love everybody. We want you to be treated the same as we are, but because you're in another country, because this is the only way we've really got to enforce that you file a return and pay your fair share, they collect it at closing. But you really got to know the ins and outs of the regs, because this comes up a lot when people get upset.
It comes back to our same thing that we've been saying in a lot of our shows, is that you have to surround yourself with some experienced people that have dealt with foreign buyers, or realtors, or closing agents, or attorneys, or I mean, what I feel so comfortable about you and sending our clients is that you're an attorney, you have a title company, you have a master's in taxation, and I mean, you're all in one. So
and I have my team too. I mean, in all fairness, I mean, this is so. you know, and again, the only reason I brought these is so people could see
That's right.
the government run amok.
Right.
One of 6.
Yeah.
So I have people that I call who do nothing but probate and estate planning for non-residents.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I did yesterday.
Right.
Just to go over it. I mean, I have a working knowledge. I have an LLM in tax, but this particular person does nothing but probate and estate planning for non-residents. I mean, I do closings. I do other
Right.
things as
Mm-hmm.
well. And I have other attorneys I know who are international tax lawyers who have all the tax treaties down cold. So if you
Right.
get in a really large transaction with a very a buyer with very intricate holdings,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they get into holding companies offshore and things like that,
Right.
and they're quite helpful. So, you know, I'm part of your team, and then I have a whole other group that's part of my team,
Yeah.
and they essentially get moved into your team.
Yep.
Because it is incredibly complex, and you've got, you know, the 8 books, and then that's just the tip of the iceberg. You've got the court cases, the private letter rulings, and so forth, and guessing what the IRS means when you have a new law enacted like we had in February.
Well, Don, I appreciate you coming on the show again,
enjoyed
and
it.
I think this has been very useful for foreign buyers that are buying here, or foreign
so.
sellers, and hopefully for real estate agents also here in the United States or the state of Florida. So, again, thank you for
Thank
coming
you.
on, and
Thanks
I
for having
look
me.
forward to seeing you next month.
Absolutely.
Thank you.